I'll never forget being a senior in college, or maybe I was a junior in college. And I had just gotten out of a conversation with Amber. We had been sitting in the dormitory lobby together and talking about the future. And Amber began to say, you know, I'm going to go on to this, and this after I graduate. And as I was hearing her discuss those things, I wasn't hearing my name come up in those plans. And here we were dating, pretty serious. And I thought to myself, what does this mean? And I went back that night that I would talk to my parents usually on Thursday nights or Friday nights, and my mom had called that week, and I talked to my mother, and I said, Mom, I was just talking, and I didn't talk a lot relationally, but here I wanted to know what was going on. And so I talked to my mom, and I told her about this conversation we had, and I talked about graduation, I talked about the future. I said, I don't know what's coming next, and I don't know what's, and my mother had motherly, godly wisdom. She knew what Amber was communicating, and whether Amber knew it or not, or whether I knew it or not, she said, well, Chad, at one point in the conversation, do you love her? And I thought, whoa, I paused. And I boldly said, yes, I do. She said, well, then she is wondering what your intentions are about the future. And if you're serious about the relationship, my mother said on the phone as boldly as she could be, if you're serious about the relationship, then I suggest you begin to tell her so that you begin to hear your name in those future plans, right? And that week I did just that, and the rest is history. Now, I had often prayed about our relationship. I definitely wanted to do the right thing by the Lord and Amber and my future and her future. But the way that the Lord answered, the way that the Lord worked was through my mother to give me a wise and godly nudge forward that I needed. Right? All the parents out there say, amen. This is the way the Lord works. It was my mother who had the relational and the godly wisdom to recognize the scope of the situation and to help me diagnose for myself my own heart and my own desires and my own initiative. She was giving me the courage to move forward. How many of you know God still uses the trusted voices of His people to nudge us in the right direction? Hopefully that's happening every Sunday when you get around the people of God and you hear the Word of God. God is still working through people to bring about the outcomes He desires for His glory. In our story today, you will see yet again God's steady hand of providence at work through things like Israelite culture, through His laws and customs, through especially the three main characters, Naomi and Ruth and Boaz, each of whom will be nudged forward to take initiative to live faithfully. We begin with a motherly nudge towards a potential relationship long term. Ruth chapter 3 and verse 1. One day, Ruth's mother-in-law, Naomi, said to her, "My daughter, I must find a home for you where you will be well provided for." And now Boaz, she says, with whose women you've been working, he is a relative of ours. Tonight, he will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. Picking up where we've left off from last week's. Ruth has been living with her mother-in-law, Naomi. And she's gone out to work and to try to provide. These are poor women with not much hope for the future. And she's been given permission to glean and work the fields of a noble and an honorable man named Boaz. The harvest season lasts approximately 3 months, and things are going well. She is receiving abundantly for her needs that will help her throughout the whole year, and Naomi as well. But now we're to fast forward in our mind, and the harvest season is coming to an end. And with the end of the harvest, there'll be a festive environment of the men and the workers on the threshing floors. Oftentimes, these floors would be gathered together, and the community would all use a similar space in a similar area, and they would fellowship together, and they would feast together and celebrate the harvest, and they would protect the grains together. And so all the grain is going to be gathered, and the men will be standing watch to guard over their grain until it is stored away. And Naomi and Ruth are there, and they've already begun to experience this incredible turn of events in their lives. God is showing his favor, his grace towards them. They're moving from emptiness to fullness, from restlessness to rest, from poverty to abundance, and from outsider status to being included along with the community and the people of God. But as the harvest comes to a close, Naomi realizes that this situation we've got, hey, it's pretty good, but it falls short in one area. It's not permanent. It's not lasting. What if things change by next harvest? Where will we be after our supplies run out? And so Naomi realizes that they still face uncertainty, and they still have the potential to remain on the margins of society year after year unless they can secure for themselves a permanent place within the protected community. So Naomi, realizing that Boaz is a relative of means, an honorable man, she discerns that their best way forward, perhaps their only way forward, is to nudge or push Ruth out there with the hope of the possibility that there might be something more permanent out of this relationship. Maybe marriage and children. Naomi recognizes 2 Hebrew laws that will help you this week and next week, so we're going to do them here. 2 Hebrew laws which should work in the favor of the women. And we're going to show you these words. They come from 2 words. The first word is the word lever. And lever is a word that is a later word to describe a set of laws in the scriptures about a brother-in-law or a series of brother-in-laws or even other relatives who are in-laws who would need to step up in their duty if a woman's spouse died. Right? Because the women in this society, their protection, their future was found in property rights, and property rights came through children and through the male line. And so to have a safe and secure place, God had, along with sort of the cultures and the customs of those days, he had laws in the Old Testament about securing how an in-law would need to marry the widow in order to produce children. Now, it sounds strange to us, but it was for the protection of the widow and the protection of her future. Okay? To make sure lines and names were maintained. There's another set of laws also in the Old Testament. They're called the Goel laws. And this is a word that means protector or redeemer. And also near relatives, if a family, and this could be any kind of relationship, if a family member was in trouble and they were in debt and they were in danger of selling themselves to slavery or indentured servitude for life, and this family member could do the honorable, the right thing to buy off their debt and thereby free the family member. And this would also maintain that family member wouldn't lose land or inheritance or future. It would help maintain protection over the family and the clan. And so here's where we get the language of redemption that runs from Old Testament to New. Redemption is to buy off debt, to purchase them so that they can be free themselves and restored. How many of you like the fact that we're redeemed by the Lord. Amen. And Naomi realizes these family connections. And this story is full of this idea. And we see both of these two separate kinds of Old Testament traditions converging on Boaz. Will Boaz do this and be this for these destitute women? Verse 3. She tells Ruth, here's what we're going to do, Ruth. Yeah. Wash. Put on perfume and get dressed in your best clothes. Then go down to the threshing floor. Don't let him know you are there. Go incognito, right? There's people around. There could be community around. Don't let him know you are there until he's finished eating and drinking. And when he lies down, note in the dark there where he lies. Then go uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what to do. Keep your eye on that line, because we're going to come back to Boaz and his character in due time. But first, it's going to get a little tense along the way. She says, go uncover his feet. He will tell you what to do. I will do whatever you say. Ruth answered. Given the honor of Boaz, the special attention that Boaz has already shown Ruth, Naomi is connecting the dots. She's seeing the potential for even greater faithfulness. And so Naomi sends Ruth to Boaz to uncover his feet, to present herself to him as an eligible bride for marriage, in the hopes that these laws that we've looked at will provide a covering for them for a more certain and secure future. This is a very risky endeavor, but God's hand was moving providentially. The book of Ruth reminds us again that God works through our own faithfulness. He is faithful. We're getting to that. But it's still reminding us that he works through human agents. He works through our faithfulness for the security and the benefit of our own future. And we see that again. You see, divine intervention is not always direct intervention. Sometimes divine intervention is indirect through the people of God. And we see here wise insight in Naomi and in Ruth and in Boaz. And we see that wise insight coming together. And it could be disastrous, but because they're wise and faithful, God is going to use their trust and their faithfulness for their good. And like these ladies, let me submit to you, if we want a secure place, an eternal place even, in the good plans of God for the world, we must continue to be challenged by Ruth, who shows us again what faithfulness looks like. What does it look like, Pastor Chad? First of all, faithfulness requires, number one, the courage or risk or trust to seek out the Redeemer's care. Verse 6. So Ruth went down to the threshing floor and did everything her mother-in-law told her to do. And when Boaz had finished eating and drinking, he was in good spirits. He was in a good mood. He went over to lie down at the far end of the grain pile, his grain pile. We already sense that Boaz has, he's shown some interest in Ruth. The problem is, normally it was the men who made arrangements for marriage. And time has passed and nothing has happened. So Naomi takes the unconventional role and place as how many mother-in-law? Sometimes they can be unconventional and they're nudging, right? No, Naomi takes the unconventional role of putting Ruth forward for marriage. This is a very well thought out plan that she has. Ruth is to do what? She is to wash. She is to perfume herself, which would have been expensive. And if they had access to any as poor women, this is going to be the very best of what they've got. She is to clothe herself in her best clothing. This is bride attire. She's to approach Boaz at the most favorable time for a positive result when he was in good spirits or a good mood. Now, my kids have learned that this works with their parents, right? It's all about when you make the request. And my sons might be making a request of Amber before I get home and wanting permission to do something. Can we stay out super late on this night? And our friends are doing this. And Amber wisely might respond, you know what? We've got this going on. I don't know about, giving you an extension on this rule. You did this last week. I'm not so sure about, let's wait till your dad gets home, right? Unbeknownst to Amber, I might have had a great day. And my sermon's done, and it's beautiful outside, and I've gotten everything done on my checklist, and I'm coming home, and everything's moving, and I come in good spirits into the house. What is going to happen? That child is approaching me. The child doesn't know, right? Hey, Dad, can I do thus and so? And I go, man, sure, yeah, that sounds good, no problem, right? Like I'm not thinking about all these other things, and Amber will look at me like, what? Right? What kind of mood are you in? This plan of Ruth had to be good because so much was at stake. Let's talk about the risk. What was at stake for Ruth? Verse 7. Ruth approached quietly and uncovered his feet and lay down. Okay. This whole plan sounds pretty wild. Even when I was growing up, I heard this verse, and we would know this story in children's church or Sunday school, and I would ask my Sunday school teacher, or I would ask my mother about this verse, and I would say, what is she doing? What's Ruth doing? This is so weird, and it doesn't seem right. You see, even as an elementary child, you realize that they're not supposed to be getting in bed together until they're married. Right? You know this as a church-brought-up Christian child. You know, whoa, what is she doing? And my mother would answer, or the Sunday school teacher, they would answer, well, they just did that. In those days, this was cultural. This was almost like it was a common thing. It wasn't. This is a little bit sketchy. Almost like it was a common thing. It was cultural, they would say. Now, there is some truth to the cultural symbolism. Stay with me. I want to teach through this because this is where the reward of the passage is. There is some truth to the cultural symbolism. Now, even today, we have some wedding traditions that can be a little weird, even a little suggestive of certain ideas. Maybe at your wedding you were told to kiss the bride, and sometimes a bride and groom will discuss how passionate should this kiss be in front of everyone, right? The groom is saying, oh, I'm going to make it passionate, baby, and the bride's going, no, not, right? Maybe at your wedding, your party snuck out during the dinner to decorate your car. And I don't know about you, but even as a young man, as an elementary age student, when I saw a car decorated with wedding stuff, and I would say, what's going on? Why is that car all decorated? My mom would snicker and go, well, they're going to their honeymoon, son, right? And she would snicker and laugh a little bit, mischievously. And I was like, what? Okay, right? They decorated my car. They went over the line in a few places and had suggestive sayings on the car and whipped cream that took out the paint, or not whipped cream, shaving cream, took out the paint of my car. There's another tradition that is super strange. Sometimes a bride will toss her bouquet and the bridesmaids will stand around, and the ladies, and they will try to be the first to catch the bouquet. And if you're the first to catch the bouquet, what does the tradition say? You're the next one to be married, right? That's the hope, right? Well, that's pretty good. The weird one is the garter. The garter tradition. Now, I had a friend, and he was at my aunt's wedding when we were teenagers, and he was also my roommate in college, one of my closest friends. His name was Greg. And Greg happened to catch the garter, right? And if the man catches the garter, it says he's going to be the next one married. He happened to catch the garter at my aunt's wedding when we were teenagers. So here we are in college. This is two other friends, and you can see Greg, he's getting ready to sing a love ballad from the 80s. They got the microphone out, and he was so proud of catching that garter. He's got it worn around his head, right? Yeah, boys, I'm going to get married. That's what he would say, just from the time we were teenagers, just being ridiculous. When my wedding rolled around, I will never forget that moment when they said, here's the chair, Chad. Bring Amber out. Bring her out to this chair, set her in the middle of the wedding party, and you've got to take the garter off her leg. Oh, man, I blushed from ear to ear. I just was like, what in the world? Here we go. I can't believe we're doing this. Shouldn't this thing be outdated and old? Those guys started to gather around. And my buddy Greg, we'll show you the next photo. He literally in this moment, he's right here. He is saying, get out of the way, young man. I'm catching this thing. He wanted to be 2 for 2, and he pushed and shoved and fought his way to the front of the line, and I flung that thing like you're supposed to do, not looking. I just went, psh, and I flung that thing out there, and he was mashing faces. He grabbed that garter, and he would love the fact that he got 2 for 2. He was definitely going to get married one day, so he thought, and he did. He did. He's a great guy. Think about that tradition just a moment, just to kind of think about things. And for younger ones, if you don't know what a garter is, right, it's a lacy piece of sort of elastic band that's worn where? Around the woman's upper thigh, up under the dress. And why was I supposed to be so embarrassed? Because in this sort of suggestive ritual, you're supposed to go up under that dress and pull that garter off. What kind of weird tradition is this? How strange and sexually suggestive, especially when you got a bunch of rowdy groomsmen catcalling at you while you do it. Woohoo, yeah, go, Chad. Oh, man, did anybody have to suffer through that as well? Anybody out there? Was I the only guy? Oh, you guys are just modern people. You're just very... Here's my point. It is possible for tradition to overlap with the suggestion of consummation. So in this story, yes, there is a cultural aspect. We'll look at that. But the author has also built into this story, and I've been researching and reading all week, everything I can read on this passage, and there is widespread agreement that this story has built into it the scandal of their sexuality. And that scandal is important to understanding the story. Why? Because it speaks to the risk and the courage that Ruth has, and that speaks ultimately to faithfulness and what the author is trying to tell the people of God. Now, stay with me. In her act of washing, perfuming, dressing to her best, in pursuing him while he's in a good mood, in the middle of the night, uncovering his feet, laying there until he is awakened, there is the cultural symbolism of both a marriage proposal and there is the sexual tension of what might happen in her pursuit. Why? Why does the author tell the story this way? The author wants to draw us in not only to good storytelling and suspense, but to the risk and the vulnerability of that moment by Ruth. She puts everything on the line, including her own life, to entrust herself into his character and what she knows about him. She is trusting in him, that he is caring, that he is honorable, that he will have a faithful response. even at the heightened risk of a scandal. You see, this could go really, really bad in two opposite extremes. On the one hand, it's the middle of the night. There's men around. She approaches him. She is in a vulnerable position to be taken advantage of and then kicked to the curb by Boaz as a Moabite woman. On the other hand, Boaz might say, "What are you doing, woman? Come in here," and completely reject her. And in rejecting her, that's going to spill out into the community, and she's going to stay rejected by the society and the people. It could do permanent damage to either her physically or her reputation among the people. Her potential for remarriage as a foreign widow could be shattered in one evening. Her potential for future and hope and all that she wants and all that Naomi wants could be lost in the hands of this man. The author wants us to be thinking about the audacity of Naomi. What does this say about Naomi? Does Naomi have a terrible character? Is she a terrible person? What does it say about Ruth? Is she terrible? What about this boldness, this risk, this audacity, this pursuit? Why would they take such a risk? The author wants us to consider it and think about it. What makes Ruth faithful in this moment? The author wants us to see her boldness, because we should begin thinking about the faithfulness of God as a redeemer, as one who saves us, and about God's character and God's honor and God's faithfulness working through Boaz to be that person to Ruth. Now, what do we know on sort of the cultural side of this? We know that in ancient Arab places like this region, there was a kind of marriage proposal where a man would toss his garment over an eligible woman to signify he was interested in taking her on in marriage. We know that that's true. So there is this symbolism of the marriage proposal. We know, and this is even more important than the symbolism, that Boaz has already shown himself faithful. The author again is reminding us this is not some dude at a bar in a one-night stand. We're supposed to be considering how the master has already protected her, already saved her, already blessed her. Boaz has already prayed for Ruth these words in Ruth 2:12, "May you be rewarded by the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take shelter." And now Ruth goes to Boaz and says, "Will you be the answer to that prayer? Will you yourself answer the prayer that you prayed over the shelter of my life?" It's an incredibly moving scene. Verse 8 gets better. This is the heart of the passage. In the middle of the night, something startled the man. He turned and, well, there's a woman lying at his feet. This has got a lot of surprise in this moment. She uncovers his feet. The cool breeze is blowing. All of a sudden, his toes are cold, and he's feeling something down there. Whoa, there's a woman there. Verse 9, "Who are you?" he asked. "I am your servant Ruth," she said. "Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a guardian redeemer of our family." It's a beautifully poetic passage. It's the central focus of the whole chapter. Why? Because in the book, it is Ruth's only firsthand statement of her own identity. And how does she identify herself? She identifies herself in connection with his identity. Stay with me, church. Here's how the passage is set up in the Hebrew. There's this question, who are you? There's this rhythm, I am and you are. And right in the middle is her request for permanent inclusion and safety and rest and shelter and protection as a bride to this man. Who does she say that he is? We've heard again and again, Ruth is the Moabite. Ruth is the widow. Ruth is the poverty one. What does she say about herself? There's no Moabite here. I am Ruth, she names herself. I am your servant. What is her request? She says, take the thing you prayed for me over. I need from you. Will you shelter me with your covering? It's a request for marriage. And what does she state about him and his character? You are a kinsman redeemer. You are one who has the ability to save and protect and to keep. You are one. Will you be this in my life? Now, with this statement, we begin to realize that she is boldly, and Naomi didn't tell her what to say. Her courage and her faith and her identity is being transformed. Her request is in who he is, his identity. And in this statement, we begin to realize this is not about seduction, even though the author is teasing us with it. It is about faithfulness. Ruth shows the courage to risk herself, her reputation, her safety, and her status by seeking out and trusting in the faithfulness of Boaz. Her faithfulness is an act of complete heroism. Ruth will later be praised along with other women in the scripture. She is, listen carefully, she is vulnerable before the master of the fields and the redeemer of her future because she trusts him. And on the basis of that trust, Ruth has risked herself with him, but she has done so wisely. And so we begin to realize, when we're thinking through this weird situation, that her willingness to stake everything, her future, her hope, her shelter, her protection, by coming to him with trust and courage, was for the possibility of lasting covenant relationship with Boaz. And we realize, because the author is a good storyteller, he wants us listening in suspense. He wants us to sense the risk and of what's going on here. Why? Because he wanted the people of God to reflect on their own covenant relationship with God. Will God, the author is asking the people, will you, the people of the God who have been blessed with grace and favor from God, will you have the kind of trust in him that will risk your future for covenant relationship with him? It's a story that gives us a picture of the master and his people, the maidservant, of the groom and his beloved, the bride. Will you pursue the kinsman redeemer with this kind of obedience and courage that Ruth shows? You see, all relationships, if done well, still take courage. They still take the risk of giving oneself for the affections of another. Not only in our courting, in our communication, but even in our sexuality. Relationships are not passive. They're not apathetic. They're not fleeting. They're not aloof. They are not a work in progress. They are something that we commit to for better or for worse. No, the relationship is dependent on vulnerability and risk and trust of that decisive moment of giving oneself to another. So what about your relationship with the Lord? The author is asking us, will you pursue your Redeemer? Will you risk safety of self-control to put yourself at his feet and offer your very life to him? Will you live faithfully in obedience to the word that comes to you that says, this Jesus is the one who is our kinsman redeemer, from whom we find permanent shelter and salvation? You see, the story is like the man who found the treasure hidden in the field, or the pearl of great price, and they go and they sell everything, putting themselves at the risk of what they have found. It's like the story of the woman who comes to Jesus, and she takes all of her life, all of her value, and she pours it out on his feet symbolically to say, will you offer me your love and your care and your forgiveness? And will you say something about me that is different than from what the world says about me? Will you care for me and receive me? She anoints his feet. This story is pointing ahead to the disciples who are gathered around Jesus. And when people are starting to leave because the teaching gets hard, because it gets too risky, and he says, will you leave me too? And they say to Jesus, Jesus, to whom else should we go? We got no other options. You alone have the words of eternal life. Is your faithfulness such that you've put it all on the line for a permanent future with your master? Is your trust one marked with the wisdom that he too is faithful and will do right by you? We'll get to Boaz next week, number 2. And Boaz does do right by Ruth. Number 2, her faithfulness shows something else. It shows the devotion to give oneself, not just to Boaz, but to the Redeemer's family. There's an extended community she's committed to. Verse 9. We'll reread it just to get the momentum going again. Who are you, he asked. I am your servant Ruth, she said. Spread out the corner of your garment over me, since you are the guardian or the kinsman redeemer of our family. Look at that raised there. She includes herself in Naomi's family. She's no longer just an in-law, just a Moabite. She begins to use our language, including him. Hey, you're in our family, and I'm doing this for our family and for our future. We have a saying in marriage counseling, you don't just marry one person, you marry the whole family. You marry the whole clan. All their genes, their personalities, all of their history will impact you one way or another. That's why there's an old joke that says, what's the difference between your in-laws and outlaws? The difference is you can't shoot your in-laws, even though you might like to. And as funny as that might be, the author is reminding us that this is more than just about will they get along or not. It's more than just about does she like Naomi or not. Right? We think she does. She loves Naomi, but it's more than that. The author is again reminding us this is about covenant community among the children of God. We don't come as individuals to our master. We come, and when we come to our master, we bring ourselves within his family, among the covenant community. Their destiny is my destiny. It's something bigger than me. Ruth begins to include herself, and in this moment towards the Lord, she says, Boaz, you've got a family duty to Naomi for redemption, for offspring, for land inheritance. And she says, Boaz, I realize that's impossible through me. And so it's our family. Her motivations are justice and faithfulness. And Boaz is honorable. So he realizes this, and he says in verse 10, the Lord bless you, my daughter. She gets blessed again. He replied, this kindness, or as we've been learning, covenant loyalty, devotion, this faithfulness is greater than what you showed earlier. You've not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor. This is a faithfulness, not just about her own next meal or her own potential to survive, but it's a faithfulness to the entire family and their rights, privileges. And Boaz rightly sees she could have potentially found another relationship, whether rich, maybe somebody wealthy. She could have been secure in somebody else's arms, or maybe poor. Maybe she could have married for love and been happy that way. After all, she's eligible and she's still in the prime of her life. And he says, listen, and he's acknowledging he's probably a much older man, a much older bachelor. Maybe not as desirable. He may not think of himself as desirable as some of these others out there. And yet, she has gone with a third option. Not marrying for wealth, not marrying out of the love of passion of somebody who's poverty and in poor. Just a love marriage. She's gone with a third option. She has sought him out in marriage relationship with Naomi, who has no heirs, no future, no property rights, and no name except through her. her, she goes through the third option. I'm going to be with you out of covenant faithfulness. She again exemplifies a devotion, a loyalty, and a love for God and the people of God that is remarkable, especially since Boaz considers himself an older man. For Ruth, there are deeper principles at work. She does not look on the outward appearance as man looks. God looks upon the heart. She looks at the heart of this situation. She does not chase after personal preferences. She honors the Lord with her commitment to be and participate in a new people that she has embraced for her journey. Covenant faithfulness occurs within covenant community. Now we close with this thought. Because today we struggle with, perhaps more than anything else in the church, the temptation to chase after our own desires and outward experiences, even in the church world. The church of Jesus Christ will not always have the appearance or look we expect it to have. And yes, sometimes it looks a little aged and weathered and beat up sometimes. But it is his family. It is his committed loved ones. It is Jesus' passion. It is Jesus' community. It is his desire to build the church, and we owe our devotion to him through his people and their endeavors as well. So Ruth 3:11, and now my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do what you ask. All of the people of my town know that you are a woman of noble character. The same word they describe Boaz with. He's of honor, of esteem, of status, of nobility. Now Ruth, coming from the opposite end, is faithful. She's honored, esteemed, and has status in his eyes. Boaz's story comes next. Just as God uses the faithfulness of a human named Naomi and Ruth and Boaz, I close with this point, and we're just putting our toe in the water. I want you to see this statement. Just as God used them in faithfulness, God will fulfill human faithfulness through Jesus Christ. I want you to stand with me and bow your heads.
Thank you for watching our video. If you liked it, share with a friend and subscribe to our channel. We go live every Sunday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. You can also support us by clicking the Give button. This allows us to continue to impact our community as well as help missions across the globe with the love of Jesus Christ. Thanks again for watching.